so you've reached the end. You've reached the end of Master Studio Lighting. But of course, as with everything in photography, the end is never the end. There's always so much more to learn. And in fact, in this case, it is really just the beginning. Because with studio lighting, what you have now is power. You have power and freedom. But what do you use that power and freedom to do? Of course, you create beautiful images. That's a given. But there should be something more than that. And instead, what you should be doing is using that power, using that freedom to create images that are memorable, that have impact, and that have a concept. So I'd like to wrap up the entirety of Master Studio Lighting to tell you what's next. What do you do after this course? Because we should always keep learning. And I want you to be able to take what you've learned and create something amazing. So in this presentation, I want to talk a little bit about what takes you from being a good photographer to a great photographer, or a photographer that stands out. Lighting is just one piece of the equation, but it's not enough. It has to be in conjunction with something else. A good photographer knows how to light. They know how to pose. They know how to compose. They know how to focus. They know, like, that's just what you need to be good. But I think a lot of us don't just want to be good photographers. We don't want to just be decent. We want to be great. We want to do something more with our work. And so to wrap up this presentation, that's what I want to focus on now. What takes you from good to great? One of the things I hope you've taken away from Master Studio Lighting is that there is no one right solution to light. Instead, there are many, many different approaches that you can take. And if you listen to somebody who's demonstrating a lighting technique and they tell you that this is the way to do portrait lighting or the way to do fashion lighting, they're lying, because there are endless solutions to a single problem. And so I want you to realize that all of this lighting knowledge is power, because then you have endless solutions at your fingertips. And I just want to show you some examples of shoots that I've done so that you can see that there's no one right maternity lighting or portrait lighting or fashion lighting. Instead, it's more about what is the purpose of the photograph. And I'm going to get into that much more in depth. So let's take a look. And in the first example here, I have two maternity images. These have drastically different moods. They're communicating different things. And the lighting is an important part of this. In one shot, it's softer, it's more ethereal, a little bit more high key. In the other shot, it's just slivers of light, very low key. But the posing and the styling and the lighting and the color and the toning all work together. Is either one of these shots better than the other? And of course, you might have a personal preference. There might be a photo that you like better, but fundamentally, there's no one correct approach to this. In the picture on the left, I wanted to create an image that was soft, a little bit more maternal and feminine for her. The photograph on the right, I really wanted to emphasize the subject's skin. And she's a very strong, powerful woman. She's a professional model, and she's having her first child. And so I wanted to create her maternity session as a work of art. Neither one is right or wrong, and each approach is stylistically different, and the lighting supports the concept of the shoot. All right, so that's maternity as one example. And the reason I wanted to start with maternity is that people a lot of times teach one maternity lighting. They go big, broad, soft, high key, but who says it has to be like that? And I want to give you that freedom and power to do something different if the situation calls for it. All right, so let's look at another example. In the next photograph, both of these are bridal images. Now, both of these are actually fashion bridal images. So I was photographing for maybe a publication or for the gown. And they are night and day, although kind of a pun because one looks like it's night and the other looks like it's day. But they communicate drastically different things. The picture on the left looks like she's wandering through a field of flowers at night. It's midnight. There's fog in the air. It's very, very mysterious. It's dramatic and it's beautiful. It's nowhere near what a typical bridal image would be, but it's effective. And it communicates a very different mood than the photograph on the right, which is high key, blown out highlights, very, very bright, minimal shadows. It's much of a more upbeat photograph. And for me as a fashion and beauty photographer, when I approach a shoot, I need to figure out what the goals of the shoot are. What is the mood that the subject should be emoting? Or what is the brand and how should the lighting contribute to that? But you'll notice in these, it's also the posing and the emotion and the styling and the set that contributes to this mood. Is either one of these better than the other? No, it just depends on what the purpose of the photograph. So you'll begin to see this theme I'll say over and over again. What's the purpose? Why were you creating that image? Take a look at another example. This is a real high school senior portrait that I did. This high school senior hired me to do a little bit of my specialty, fashion flair, adding that fashion feel to her portrait. And we developed a bunch of different concepts. And some of these concepts were bright, colorful, poppy. Others were a little bit more dramatic, black and white, gritty. And so both of these are beautiful photos, but the purpose dictated the styling and the lighting and the posing and the emotion. And so again, lighting is just one part of that equation. Both of these photos, lighting is important, but it doesn't make the entire shot. And then lastly, my specialty, fashion and beauty photography. This subject, first of all, she was gorgeous and I was endlessly inspired. There was a million different ways that I could shoot her, and that's just it. There's not going to be, for any one subject, one way to light or photograph them. There might be a way that's more flattering. There might be a way that communicates an emotion that that subject wants to show. And so these photographs were all taken in a matter of about 4 hours. They are drastically different. So when you look at it, the first one is shot with a beauty dish and a little bit of white fill. It's very, very natural, a little bit softer. But then that next shot, the one in the middle, is really hard light. In fact, a bare bulb. So hard that the shadows through the headpiece she had on are cast onto her face. And that is strong and it's poppy and it's graphic. And then the last photo is using something called a magnum reflector. So it's a little bit bigger, broader than a bare bulb or zoom reflector, but it's still really hard light and it's very poppy. So you look at those shots and they are drastically different and they're all beautiful. And so it more depends on the purpose of the photo. What are you trying to communicate? The first one, I get natural, skincare. The second shot, I get fashion, edgy. The third shot, maybe it's a little bit more of cosmetic beauty. And so to take your lighting and to take your images to that next level, ask yourself, what is the purpose of the photo? So as I've mentioned a few times, lighting is just a piece of the equation. If you want to be more than good, you want to be great, you need a great idea. A photograph that's well lit, well posed, focused, nice, all of that will only be good. But if there's a greater idea, greater impact, that's what makes it great. Now, let's take a look at this list here. Whenever I approach a shoot, I ask myself, what is the purpose of the shoot? Why am I creating this image? And all of these elements need to work together. The lighting, the posing, the props, the hair and makeup, the wardrobe, the storytelling, the in-camera techniques, the location, the post-processing. None of these can stand alone and make a good photograph. And so, for example, I use this example all the time. I was looking at a photographer's portfolio and they showed me a picture of a girl and she's wearing this futuristic silver dress. It's kind of like strong angles and kind of like alien-esque. And the dress was cool. I really liked it. So it was nice wardrobe, nice styling. And then they were shooting in this beautiful location. It was kind of rolling hills, kind of wheat backlit. Great location. Really, really beautiful. You could create many beautiful photos there. So it's nice wardrobe and nice location. And then it was late in the day. And so the light was really warm. It was very glowing. And so it was really beautiful lighting. And then she had a cat eye on for her makeup and a beautiful curl to her hair, and then she's got this really romantic pose. And so all of the elements alone were successful, right? The posing and the lighting and the location and the wardrobe and all of that. But the picture failed. So why is that? It's not that it failed, it's that the elements didn't work together. The purpose was unclear. And I find that when you take all of these different elements together and they build upon each other, it multiplies them and it makes it an even more strong image. So right away, the person looking at the image, the viewer, knows how they're supposed to feel. They know how the subject feels. All of those elements are cohesive. So yeah, it's not that the photo is a failure, but the purpose got muddied. It got lost. And so it can be a good photo, but it's not going to be a great photo. As I say all of this, it sounds like I've always known this, but that is not the case at all. And if you look at my very earliest work, I was just as bad at lighting as anyone else. But I was also just as bad at this kind of idea, like the idea behind having a concept, having a purpose, developing a shoot. I just kind of threw stuff together and crossed my fingers. And so I wanted to show you some examples of this because I want you to know that you too can grow to be better. You can grow to not just be good, but you can grow and actually create some photos that are great. And so let's take a look at kind of my journey. Right now, I love where I am in my career because I get to create beautiful images that fit my style and my vision. And each of those photographs has a concept. So let's look at my early work. Taking a look at these photographs, this is where I began. I began as a portrait photographer in upstate New York in a small town, and I photographed what everyone photographs, I think, in small towns. A lot of times you start off shooting everything. And so I know I'm not alone. A lot of other photographers shoot weddings and maternity and babies and graduations and anniversaries, like whatever comes their way. And so you're just trying to make a living and to try to get some practice. And so you can see that in my work. It's technically competent. The poses are decent and the lighting is decent, but there's no clear vision and there's not really a purpose behind the photos. So that is my early business. And I started my business around 2000. So I have a lot of practice in place. So now let's look at how I am today. Today, I am a fashion and beauty photographer. I shoot a lot of beauty, but I also shoot fashion. And this can be a range of things, whether I'm photographing handbags or eyelashes or beauty campaigns. I shoot for magazines you may have heard of, like Elle magazine, and I shoot for fashion designers. And I'm constantly creating. And you can take a look at these images in the fashion and beauty world. I tend to get hired for my vision and also for my ability to light, to use lighting to be able to emphasize a product or to create a mood or to bring out the best in that brand. And you can see that this has applicability towards many different types of clients. The picture on the left, for example, is something I shot for Haagen-Dazs, while the picture on the right is a campaign for an eyelash company. And I've shot ads for Canon and handbag companies, and this is where I am today. But I did not start there. And I gave you a kind of an idea of what I got paid for in my early career, but I want to show you a little bit of before and afters. So I show you this to be humble, but also to show you that no matter where you are in your career, you aren't stuck. You can always evolve. And I know a lot of people, it's kind of this growth of when you start, you have quick growth in learning technique. And then once you learn a lot of technique, like mastering studio lighting, learning this lighting, a lot of people plateau. They don't know how to take it to the next level, to become a well-established or a known photographer, or to create images that are more successful. But there's always time and ability to grow. And I'm going to share a little bit of my suggestions with you. So let's take a look here. In 2001, this is one of my very early family portraits. Now, if you look at the lighting, for example, probably the hair light on the person without hair wasn't really a good idea. It's fine, like it's correctly exposed and the lighting's fine. But notice that lighting is not the only part of it. It's the composition and the posing and the focus and the color and also the purpose. You know, they don't look like a family and there's no idea behind this shot. You could tell I kind of just had them show up and I took a photograph. Picture on the right is the kind of work I do now, and it is night and day. It is a completely different approach because there was an idea, there was a story, there was a concept, there was styling. The lighting supported all of that. Every element of the shot works together to create impact. So that's took me 17 years to really get that evolution. But I'm hoping that Master Studio Lighting makes this much quicker for you because it took me a decade to start to feel comfortable with lighting and over a decade to start to feel comfortable with posing. And so I had only mastered really the technique at that 10-year mark, but I didn't know how to take it to the next level. So let's look at some more examples of my early work. Here is an example of before and after, early and today, of a couple's portrait. The picture on the left, there is no concept. There isn't a story behind that. They showed up. I told them to match. I shot them on a black background. But notice the lighting is not great, but neither is the posing, neither is the styling. There's no idea behind it. But the picture on the right, all of a sudden, there's a lot more there. There's mood, there's storytelling. And this couple, they're actually performers. She was a ballerina and he was an actor. And so I picked a shoot where the lighting showed theatrics and drama, but also the dress showed these theatrics and the pose did. So it's all of these elements that build upon each other to emphasize the concept of this couple shoot. All right, so let's just take a few more examples of this to prove the point. Here you can see an early Christmas card I did on the left. and a little bit more of me on the right, which is a fashion editorial. It's the lighting and the styling, but notice there's a concept. And if I continue on, some of my early beauty work, the technique was missing on the left. On the right, the technique is what improved drastically. And in the last shot, the reason that this one's really important to illustrate these concepts is both of these shots were taken with the identical lights, the same exact studio strobe, the same number of studio strobes, and the same modifiers. So just knowing technique or just having gear is not what makes a great photograph or an impactful photograph. The picture on the left, I found a cheap dress that I put her in. I had her style her own hair and makeup, and I didn't really have an idea behind it. It wasn't like, oh, I want her to look soft and dream, or I want her to look dark and dramatic and mysterious. It was just, I want her to stand there and I want to try some lighting. And I think you can tell that. It lacks the impact. The picture on the right, I had her in the dress and I had her twirl. And I thought the twirling dress looked a bit like a kaleidoscope. And so I lit with this in mind. And I had an angle with this in mind. I posed with this in mind. And by the way, the difference between the light and the left and right, I mentioned it's all the same lights, but I did, of course, add gels. So you can see those differences there. So when you look at my early work, the work produced 10 years ago, 15 years ago, even as little as 5 years ago, now it's very different. And the question is, what changed? Now, of course, practice makes perfect. Part of it's practice. I shoot often. I push myself often. I try to shoot and do creative days 2 to 4 times a month. Shoots where all I'm doing is I'm trying something new. I'm experimenting. I'm trying a new lighting technique. I'm trying a new concept. Because when you give yourself that freedom, when there's no clients there, that's when you feel free to make mistakes, try something new, but you often discover something new as well. And so I can't recommend that enough. So that's one of the things that changed is time. Time and mistakes and learning what works, but then not being stuck in what works. I think that's what happens to a lot of people. They find one thing that works and then they stay there and then you can't evolve. So you should always be experimenting. But there's something bigger that happened, not just me getting better at photography, but me getting better at the ideas behind my work. And so one of the biggest things that changed, one of the biggest things that separates you from being good to great is having a concept, a purpose for each photo, and style. And so I want to look at these a little bit closer. I want to dive into what concept and style really means. Because as you evolve in your career and in your photography, concept and style, you're going to hear these over and over again, and they're going to become very important to taking it to the next level. Related to this is the idea of leading with why, not how. Many photographers we're gear nerds. We like our tech, we like our equipment, we like our modifiers. We get caught up in that stuff. We get caught up in the gear and the numbers. And so what happens and what makes many people get stuck is they lead with, how do I light this? What lens do I want to choose? They lead with these things that are irrelevant. You should lead with, why are you taking the photograph? And how can you choose the elements to support this why? How should you light a person to support the concept? How should you pose a person to support this concept? How can you style a person to support this concept? And so you should always be leading with that why first instead of the how. Now, that being said, it's okay, for example, for you to experiment with a new lighting technique and go, okay, I want to try this high key lighting. But keeping in mind what high key lighting communicates. It's brighter, it's more ethereal, it's maybe perhaps more joyful. So then you pick a subject or you communicate in a pose in the styling, something that fits that lighting. But that should be more for experimentation. And then when it's time to shoot, you have all the tools available to support any why, to support any purpose, but not have to stick to just one formula. I think that's something that you will struggle with and you'll have to evolve, but I'm going to show you some examples of this. And so these are 2 photographs that I took of a model very, very recently, and they were both taken within an hour of each other. And the why for each of these photographs was very different. In the first photograph, the reason I wanted to shoot it is I wanted to shoot nude on nude tones. I wanted it to be fresh. I wanted it to look organic. I wanted it to be feminine because right now in the world of fashion and beauty photography, you see a lot of these nude on nude tones, warm tones. And I wanted to shoot this for the subject's book. And I also wanted to shoot it for my portfolio. So I wanted to communicate all of these things: softer, more organic, more natural. And so you can see that in the makeup. It's very natural. You can see the softer look in her expression and the background choice, but also in the lighting. By the way, this was lit with a really big scrim, a large diffusion panel lit to give me a really broad light source. And then there's an umbrella behind her from behind that gives that little highlight on the neck. So the why was that natural nude tone, all of that. The picture on the right, I wanted to give her something really, really drastically different. I wanted to give her something that looked more film noir, more cinematic, a little bit grittier, much, much, much more dramatic. And so you see that change in the makeup. It's darker, smokier now. You see the change in the really focused beam of light. You see the change in the toning. I also sprayed her face to make it look like maybe she was in the rain. It's very dramatic and cinematic. There's storytelling to it. So I started with what I wanted to convey, and then I lit to fit that. And I wanted to give her drastically different moods. So I led with the why. What kind of shots am I wanting to create? And then how can I do that? Through lighting and styling and posing, all of those elements together. Again, they don't exist separately. A successful photograph can't rely on one of those pieces alone. So of course, looking at these images and looking at the examples I've shown you, one thing that got better was my technique. The next thing that got better was my purpose, my concept behind each shot. But then you'll see that there's a couple other things that improved as well. And those things are my creativity, my experimentation, as well as my style. So I would like to take a moment now to talk a little bit about how I became more creative. And it is very, very much tied to rejection. Anytime you see a photographer that looks like they had instant success, or they pretend to, it's not the case. Everybody has struggles, and everyone has to develop to becoming a better photographer. And so what happened to me was that early on in my career, I was that small town photographer that shot everything. And I never thought about style. I never thought about concept. I never thought about creativity. And I shot a lot. And then eventually I took a class in fashion photography. I took this class. It was more about studying the masters. And I was looking at these images, and I was absolutely enthralled, because I felt like this is what I'm meant to be doing. This is the type of imagery I'm meant to be creating. And that's actually one of the first times when I realized that everything can work together and have a purpose. And I'd see these images that had such storytelling and such impact and emotion and the lighting and the posing. And I was just absolutely in love with them. And so in college, I started to shoot some fashion images. And so I built an entire portfolio. And at this point, I'd been shooting like 8 or 9 years when I graduated college. And, afterwards I was shooting, and I was living in London, and I built my fashion portfolio, and I was reaching out to these magazines. And by the way, I'd reach out to 200 magazines at a time and hear back from like 2. And usually the answer was, no, we're not interested in meeting with you or accepting your photos. So it was hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of emails that I would send out. And then eventually this one magazine, this editor said, yep, I'd love to meet with you. And so I went to meet with this guy, and he looked through my whole portfolio, and he was brutally honest. And when he looked at my work, he basically said, yeah, you're good at posing and lighting, and you're good at, overall making someone look good, but that is not enough. If he meets with, and he said this, he basically said, if I meet with 5 photographers, 10 photographers in a week, and you walk out of here, I'm going to forget you because you blend in. And the important lesson that he taught me, and it was brutal and it was hard, but it was true, is that you have to have a style. You have to have a style. You have to have a voice, a vision in which you see the world in order to be memorable and in order to stand out. And I never even remotely touched on style for the first decade of my shooting, because style, I felt like if you focus and you have a particular look and feel, then you're excluding yourself from other jobs. But the problem is if you are neutral, if you are just average, you're never going to be attracting people that are really, really passionate. And so if you shoot weddings and babies and events and sports and all of this, then when someone needs a maternity photographer that does this particular style, it's not going to be you, because you don't have that style or vision. For me in fashion photography, the jobs I get hired for is when they need something that has dramatic light, poppy colors, then they come to me. But if they want something that's soft and dreamy and ethereal, feminine, desaturated, then it's usually not going to be me. And it's okay to not have work that makes everyone happy. It's much better to have a voice that attracts people to your vision and what you have to offer. So I left this meeting after he looked at my book, and he basically told me I should get rid of the whole thing. He said, you know what? Until you have a voice or a vision, all of this is pointless. And I absolutely cried a lot. I was very dramatic about it. And I will never be important enough to have my own movie. But if I did, let's just pretend, this would be a scene in it, because I'd be like holding my portfolio, walking down the street. It was raining. I'd be crying hysterically. It did happen. And for a while, I just didn't want to shoot. The guy basically told me what I had shot for the last 8-9 years of my life was pointless, and that everything I had shot had no value. But what I was able to take away from it eventually is that I needed to find something that was uniquely me, that had a voice, that had a style, and that had concept. All of these things that I've started to talk about with you guys. And so what I did is for the next year, about next year, is I would shoot once a week, where I would try to experiment with concepts and experiment with lighting and try to be more creative. But most importantly, to find my style, my unique voice, what I had to bring to the table that was different and memorable compared to everyone else. So over this year of shooting and experimenting, I would give myself assignments, and I would try new lighting techniques or new concepts. And I found, and I strongly believe this, that creativity is a muscle. The more you work it, the stronger it becomes. Because as you try new things, your brain is making new connections. And all of a sudden you make a mistake with lighting, but you realize, you know what, that mistake actually might, with a little bit of a tweak, work for another concept and another execution. And so this is one of the reasons I still think that experimentation and shooting for fun is important. And I do it every single month. And so I want to show you some examples of how my creativity evolved beyond just technique. And so these images are a portfolio I shot in, it was for a model, and I shot it in 2011. And so you can see, I think that they're nicely composed and the lighting is decent. The styling's kind of boring, but overall they're nice photographs. I think that they're solid technically, but solid technically is a baseline. How about the next photograph? So you move from 2011 to 2016, and these images are completely different. And yes, my technique got better. Obviously, between 2011 and 2016, I was practicing more, experimenting more in the studio, but there's something else. The images have more impact and they're more creative, and you start to see my style. If you hire me, that unique vision, it's bold, it's creative, it's poppy, it's strong, it's graphic. And so if you want that look, you'd hire me. But if you wanted a more model portfolio that was dreamy, ethereal, soft, subdued, then I wouldn't be the right person. But that's fine, because people hire me for my look and feel. So I've touched on style, and I've mentioned this, and you see the style between those two examples. I see how it evolves, but what does style really mean? Because it's kind of this vague concept, like what is a style? How could you get one? And most photographers, as they're developing in their career, just are afraid of the idea of style, afraid of pigeonholing themselves into one look. But again, it's what makes you memorable. And so I want to show you some examples of style so you can see what I'm talking about. Now, style typically, it's, for me, when I think of the photographers that I love, the ones that I adore, and I invite you to do the same. Imagine all of the photographers that you just drool over their images and the ones that you wish you could be more like. I guarantee you they have a style. They have a unique take on the world. And so don't you want the same for yourself? Like that's definitely that next step from going from good to great. So typically, style is 3 to 5 words. These words, you see them weaving throughout the photographer's portfolio. They're repeated over and over again. And usually one word is for subject matter. So they photograph portraits, or they photograph sports, or it's celebrity portraiture, or it's fashion or beauty, or it doesn't have to be that specific. It could be relationships. They photograph relationships between a husband and wife, or a family, or anything like that. So it's subject matter. The next part of the equation is usually something visual. It's dark, or it's cinematic, or it's colorful, poppy. It's all of that kind of thing. And then the last one is usually something emotive. The images are joyful, they're mysterious, they're dark, they're it's creepy, there's something. And it's not that these words don't somehow change, but usually you see these three things weaving throughout the photographer's body of work. And so I'm going to invite you to do something. I'm going to show you examples of some photographers with a clear style. But I invite you to go back and select 3 to 5 of your favorite photographs. The ones, not the ones that necessarily got the best reception on social media or anything like that, but the images that speak most to you, the ones that feel most like you as photos, the ones that you're connected with the most. Take a look at them and see what they have in common. Do they have common subject matter? Are all of them of couples? Are all of them of families? Are all of them of fashion? What is a subject matter that unites them? And then the next thing, how about the emotion? Are they all joyful? Are they more mysterious? And how about the visual element? Is there a similar color palette or a similar approach to lighting? And so if you can see this in the 3 to 5 photos, you're starting to see that you have a look, you have a style, you have a feel. And of course, this can evolve over time, but it's good to evolve it, to make an effort to shoot more of this and have a cohesive style. All right, so let's take a look at some examples of style. And so I picked some people very close to me. One of them is Brooke Shaden. And I asked Brooke to give me what she thought her style was. And Brooke said her style is dark, both visually and in the subject matter. It's painterly, is visual element. It's whimsical. That's very much in the emotional part of it. It's always a little bit surreal, dreamlike, not based in reality. And then the subject matter is its fine art. A lot of it's self-portraits. So let's take a look at examples of Brooke's work. And instantly, I feel like you can see what style is. You see it in the color palette, in the subject matter, in the lighting, in the composition, in the emotion, the way that you feel about the photographs. There's a clear vision, a clear view of the world that you can see throughout her work. Now, of course, many of you don't shoot fine art, so let me show you another example. I asked Chris Knight to tell me about his style. And so he shoots portraits, and it's often character portraits or stylized portraits, but it's portraiture. And then he said that his approach is very dramatic. It's emotionally dramatic. The visuals are, it's very painterly, but everything always looks timeless. It's not super modern or super old. It can exist in this plane of time that if you look at some of the photographs, you don't know if they're old or new. It's gorgeous. I love it. And so let me show you what this looks like. And so you can see these 3 photographs. They're all drastically different. One's a close-up, one's a mid-length, one's more of a conceptual art piece, but they're all clearly taken by a person with a unique vision. It's all by the same person. And this lighting, I know, was lit completely differently, using different modifiers, different numbers of light, different techniques, but it's the sensibilities that informs how he shoots. And of course, the middle photo is the best photo he has, undoubtedly, but it's the color palette and the lighting. It's a unique style and it makes him memorable. And then, of course, let's take a look at me. For me, I shoot bold graphic fashion photography. Bold is in my styling. It's never like kind of soft and subdued. It's always very bold. Bold in the makeup, bold in the lighting. It's graphic in the compositions, and it's fashion and beauty photography. This tends to be what my work looks like. And here's an example of some of my photos. If you look, those are all drastically different. Different color palettes taken on different days, different subjects on location versus the studio. But they all are me. They all have my vision behind them. One of the cool things about having a style is it actually kind of makes things a little bit easier, because when you have a lens through which you see the world, it makes your creative decisions easier. It informs your creative decisions. So for example, if you're given a theme or a subject and you have all the possibilities in the world for how to shoot them or how to light them, when you have a style, you kind of know how to do you, like do your look. And that's why someone comes to you. That's why someone hires you. I'm going to show you an example from me. For example, I was asked to do a shoot with the theme of religion. So religion can be done a billion trillion different ways, right? You could photograph it dark and dramatic. You could photograph something angelic. You could photograph something that looks like a sculpture. You could photograph it like there's no shortage of different ways you could create that image. But I know what my style is. I know what my vision is. And I shoot bold, graphic, colorful. And so what came to my mind when I think of religion, or in this example was thinking of religion, is I thought of these big halos. the big gold halos, because that reminded me of big gold headpieces. And I love to shoot avant-garde headpieces. And then also, I was thinking of a Dolce & Gabbana runway show that looked very queen-like and religious, and it was all beautiful reds and crowns. And so I decided to develop my concept around that. Now, I don't want you to think, I'm giving you things that only apply to fashion photography. I promise you this applies whether you shoot maternity or you shoot weddings. Like it applies to everything if you want to take it to the next level. All right, and I also don't want you to think that this costs a lot of money. So I wanted to do this big avant-garde headpiece thing, and it doesn't have to be expensive. And so this whole shoot I did with things that I bought off of Amazon. And so you can see here, the halo that I selected was a $35 mirror from Amazon. But I knew that if I mounted it on a stand and put it behind her head, it would look like a big headpiece. And then I found her dress and the costume jewelry on Amazon, and the shirt was $20, and some of the earrings were like $8, and necklace was $12. And so if you take a look at this photograph, I don't think it looks cheap and like it came from Amazon. But that's because there was a purpose and there was a style. So the purpose of this photo and the style of this photo, it's poppy, it's colorful, it's dramatic, it's a fashion interpretation of a religious iconography. And for those of you, since you've taken Master Studio Lighting, if you want to know how it's lit, you can see here, it is lit with 2 beauty dishes. One's above to sculpt out the face, and the second one is below to fill in the shadows. And then there was a grid on the background so that you get that kind of glow from behind her head. So I thought that the lighting also reinforced that a halo would glow. Now, as you are trying to figure out your own style, remember, take a look at your own work. What do your images have in common? What are the visual elements, the subject matter, the emotion? And then also ask yourself how you came up with the idea. How did you get to that photograph? Were you connected with the subjects in the moment? Was it starting from a headpiece that you saw, or maybe it was a location or lighting or another photographer? But figure out where that inspiration came from and then build upon that. A lot of people, they don't know how to be creative repeatedly. They kind of once in a while stumble across a good idea, but then when it's time to do it again, it seems like luck. That 100% was me. I absolutely used to be like that until I started to analyze where my ideas were coming from and how I would develop successful shoots. And now that I know my creative process, I can go back to that over and over and over again. So I just want to show you some examples of this and how lighting and purpose and style all comes into play. And so how my brain processes this. And yours, you will process this totally different. And that's the point, because that's your individuality. That's what makes you different as a photographer. It makes you stand out. So for example, a stylist sent me a photograph of these headpieces. I was looking at them, and at times I'm inspired by starting with a single element. So I looked at them and I said, okay, well, how would I shoot them? What's my style? My style is bold and graphic and colorful. So I thought the way that I could shoot these headpieces would be to do a gold background or gold makeup or gold on gold, like really make a strong, powerful woman, because that's part of my style. And the lighting's not going to be soft and ethereal. It's going to be poppy like I shoot. And so looking at this, you could think of a totally different concept for how to photograph these headpieces. But these following images that I came up with, because I had a concept, I wanted to build an African queen, strong, elegant, lots of gold, it informed my creative decisions. Notice that the posing is strong. And the gold on gold informs the makeup and the styling of the dresses. And so my concept and my style informed how I would approach this. And so here's some more examples of how I built upon that original idea. Okay, here's another example. So I decided that I wanted to create something that was looked like expensive styling, really graphic hat and dress, but for really cheap. And I'll show you how. But for me, if I'm going to be photographing something with a graphic headpiece and a shapely dress, that I need to emphasize that. And the best way to do so is to create a silhouette. So the purpose is to emphasize those shapes. And the best way to emphasize those shapes is through a silhouette. So the why informs the how. And so I think the photograph that I created, it's very graphic, it's very bold, it's very me. I think it's memorable. but I don't want you to think it's expensive. And so let's take a little peek behind the scenes. I created this dress and headpiece with cardboard. It's just foam core. And I cut out a circle for the headpiece. And then we held the foam core to create the shape of a dress. And she is just wearing a really cheap bodysuit. But it looks like avant-garde, expensive styling because I came in with a purpose of what I wanted to create. And then I was able to figure out what styling I needed and lighting I needed and posing. Notice the posing is also graphic. The why informed the how and how to light, pose, style, and retouch. All of those things together. How about a why that I get quite often for skincare? Wanting to shoot something that's very organic and natural. And so the concept in this shoot was to do a bit of a beauty Mother Nature shoot. And so in my head, I would think, okay, maybe more natural light, softer, more fill to the shadows, everything being nude tones, maybe bringing in props that are more organic and natural, things that are from the earth, whether it's leaves or twigs or flowers. And so based on that why, based on that concept, I could decide how I could create this. And here's an example of one of the images I created. And again, it's done very inexpensively. I used a burlap spool, some foam core, face paint, a painter's drop cloth, a very inexpensive shoot. And it was lit with window light. I had her sitting in front of the window with negative fill, black pieces of foam core on the left and right of her face, which absorb the shadows. And what that does is it emphasizes her jawline and her cheekbone. So an important point here is we just went through master studio lighting and we've learned all about lighting, but I don't want you to think that studio lighting always has to be the solution or is always the right solution. Sometimes for your concepts, a more naturally lit photo might be more appropriate. Or in the studio, you can emulate that natural light feel. Big softboxes, narrow depth of field, scrims, things like that. But don't feel like more is always better. Sometimes natural light or one light is actually the right solution for what you're trying to achieve. And here's a couple more photographs from that shoot. Okay, so one last example here. This last example is I was photographing a ballerina, and I decided that the why, the concept, was that I wanted to emulate a Degas painting. I wanted it to look like this painter who really focused on dancers. And so when I looked at his work, it was often looking like it's one, maybe two lights, and it was always painterly strokes. So I figured what I could do to make it look like an old painting would be to put on that tutu, have a very united color palette, shoot on canvas, and then add a little bit of motion blur. So I could actually use a longer shutter speed to allow ambient light to show and wiggle my camera a little bit. So the purpose would be to actually make the photo out of focus because it would look more painterly like brush strokes. So sometimes your purpose encourages you to make mistakes that are on purpose for the end goal. And so my opinion on all of this is that I've taught you a ton of rules of lighting, the do's and don'ts, but break them if they look on purpose and they support the concept of your photograph. You can go with overexposed highlights or dark shadows or a blurry photograph, but only if it's clear that it's communicating what you were intending about that subject or for the purpose of that shoot or that brand or whatever it may be. And so you see this here that, yes, it's out of focus and it's blurry, but you definitely get that this is supposed to look like an old painting. So I think of this all kind of like a pyramid of foundations that build upon one another, and your technique is a foundation. So understanding posing and understanding lighting and understanding composition, all of those things gives you the knowledge and the base to then be able to express a concept through your images. So when you have that concept, you can use the lighting and the posing and all of the other elements to make that concept apparent and be successful. But then on top of that, once you master technique, and as you start to be able to express your concept, the top part is style. Weaving through some common themes throughout your work to create memorable images and a unique vision through which you see the world. And so now you've really mastered one part of technique. So can you start working with concepts, and can you eventually develop your own style? Here's how I think of it. Lighting is power. Lighting is power and it's freedom to develop your concepts and eventually have your own style. And so Master Studio Lighting, we have learned a lot. We've experimented a lot. But in the end, it's not just about knowing where to place a light. It's not just about knowing right exposure or how to shoot with 5 lights or 6 lights. It's all about being able to express your creative vision, because there is no right or wrong way to light. There's no right or wrong style. There's no right or wrong tools to use. And so it's knowledge is power, and it's power to create the images that you want to create. So thank you so much for joining me for Master Studio Lighting, and I cannot wait to see what you're able to do with this power you now have.